according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your slave who has just come in from plowing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on your apron and serve me while I eat and drink. Later you may eat and drink'? Do you thank the slave for doing what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are worthless slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
I come to you in the name of God who empowers us all. Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. So take out your bulletin, turn to Habakkuk. If you got a pencil, use it. If you don't, just remember the very last line. The righteous live by their faith. Commit that to memory. Beyond this morning. This sermon is kind of chunky. It's not very smooth with transitions, but it's got good stuff in it, so I hope you'll listen anyway. Chunk 1 is background. And we start with Habakkuk, who is opening his entire letter by complaining to God. Nobody is listening, including you. Nobody is saving us. You're making me see wrongdoing. You're making me look at trouble. Destruction and violence are in front of me. Strife and contention is rising. The law has become slack, and justice never prevails. And what is up with that? God's answer is, write the vision. Make it plain on tablets, so that a runner running by can read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end, and it does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them. The righteous live by their faith. The psalm sounds like a mini book of Proverbs. It assumes that the world and life is reasonably well ordered. It assumes that there is a strong relationship between actions and results. There are deeds and consequences related to those deeds, a pattern of action that leads to predictable results. If there's a contradiction to this worldview, it is only temporary. It's an illusory issue that will soon go away. Wish. When the world does not seem to conform to the pattern, one should remain faithful, there's that word again, and endure the momentary absence of the proper conditions. Ultimately, the good, the right, and the proper will be rewarded. Ultimately, the best attitude in life is one that trusts in God, does good, and waits patiently. I am not a patient waiter. You may have known that. I'm just guessing. So, chunk 1, background. Chunk 2, new information that I learned this week. Well, this is not the new part. I'll tell you in a minute. There are 2 paragraphs in this morning's gospel. They are not related to each other. They are one and two of 4 separate sayings, all of related to discipleship and kind of connected to each other, but they are not dependent on one another. If I talk about the two sentences I'm going to talk about, I am not ignoring the context, and I am not doing damage to the text in terms of not addressing the larger paragraph around it. And the two we're going to look at are these. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." And the Lord replied, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you would say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." I haven't moved many mulberry trees. I don't know about you. Here's what I learned. I already knew that different languages handle some vocabulary differently. For example, when I took Greek in seminary, it was required. I would never have done it otherwise. I learned that there is more than one kind of past tense in Greek. There's one past tense that says, "This happened and it's over and done. The flower died." There's another kind of past tense that says, "That happened and it's still happening now. It's still occurring, changing, shifting now," which is a totally different thing. So here's what I learned this week. There are two kinds of if in Greek. I-F, that cute little word, if. Two kinds. One is if what I'm saying is true and matches. And the other kind is if what I say is inaccurate. So, if I say, "If I were you, comma, ... that's clearly not accurate. I am not you. I do not have your life history. I do not have your street address. I do not have your children or your parents or your upbringing. I am not you." So, "if I were you" is not accurate. Okay? The other one is accurate. If Jesus Christ is Lord, comma, well, yeah, that's accurate. That's what we say every Sunday morning. It's true. It's true. And that's the kind of if that is in this sentence about our faith and the mustard seed. It's true. Wrap your head around that. It's as if Jesus said, "If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, and you do, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." Does that just make your head spin? It took me 3 days at home this week to kind of go, what the heck do I do with this? Because I have spent my whole life thinking I wasn't faithful enough, that I couldn't do fill in the blank because I wasn't faithful enough, pious enough, good enough, fill in whatever. And this is saying we are, right now, without doing one more thing. We are faithful enough. That mustard seed, that little teeny tiny, that's enough. Now, it's very tempting to go down the rabbit hole of, so what have I been using that for to not do? What have I been saying? Well, if I just had enough faith, I could do fill in the blank. And, oh, I don't have enough faith, so I don't have to do that. Oops. We're not going there today, but ponder on that. Right now, what I want you to think about is this. Jesus' response is not a judgment on the absence of faith. It's an affirmation of the faith that the disciples already have. And it's an invitation to live and act in that faith. The apostles asked for an increase in faith, and Jesus says, even the small faith you have is already effective and powerful beyond your recognition. That just makes me turn in circles. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that? I've always heard that passage as saying I don't have enough faith. But now I do. Like, okay, as of 2 days ago, I have enough faith. as of 5 minutes ago. You all have enough faith. Congratulations. How do we reorient ourselves to that? Jesus says, I have the faith the size of a mustard seed. I get that part. Mustard seeds are teeny seed. That's a really accurate representation of my faith. I know all too well about how many doubts I have and how many places I fall short. Oh, wait. Jesus says that little tiny bit, it's enough. Jesus says if I just use what I have, I could do some amazing things, like mulberry trees, planted in water. And when I stopped to think about that this week, and when I have the courage to be honest with myself, I have to admit that there are a couple things in my life, probably more, that I have done that really are kind of amazing. Here's one of them. On February 7th, 1997, right about 12 noon, Stina and I pulled out of our driveway in Atlanta, Georgia, headed for Berkeley, California. We were driving a 17-foot U-Haul truck. There was no air left in it because it was so fully packed, and towing my 1990 Volvo station wagon. The truck was a stick shift, and it had a regulator so we couldn't go faster than 55 miles an hour, no matter what freeway we're on and how many cars were passing us. We were as long as an 18-wheeler, we just bent in a different place. We were accompanied in the cab by our two cats who were both in separate crates and a hermit crab. I don't remember why we took the hermit crab. I'm sure there was a good reason. Rob and Knox had spent the last day and a half packing the truck, tying things in place as they went. They had come over earlier in the week to walk through the house and plan what would go where in the truck. Several other friends from church had helped carry things out of the house one by one, and as we pulled away, Kate was busy inside the house, giving it a final and absolutely thorough cleaning so we didn't have to do that. Our goal that first day was to get to Opelika, Alabama, where we had a reservation at a Motel 6, and we made it before supper. Over the next 10 days, we learned to make plans one day at a time because you get really tired driving a very noisy truck at 55 miles an hour. Over the next 10 days, we learned to ask about truck parking and pull through exits before we made a motel reservation. And we figured out how to medicate our diabetic cat safely and effectively. We developed a routine for arriving and settling in for the night and a routine for packing up and getting gone each morning. We also learned that when a U-Haul truck breaks down, the mechanic's goal is to get you back on the road in hours, not days, even if it means cannibalizing another truck for parts. He came back and said, I left a sign on the dashboard that said, don't rent this one. You know, I would worry if I worked in that system, but I was kind of grateful, I gotta tell you. That trip is the continuation of what was already a long story, filled with amazingness from its beginning all the way up to this very morning and the fact that I'm standing here preaching at you. I think it is mostly from looking back at everything that has happened that I recognize all the places that God's grace and care was so abundant and so evident. I think that review is what has expanded and solidified and deepened and reinforced my faith. I lean on that new and improved faith every day as I lean into the stresses and strains that my family is wrestling with right now. But it's not just about individuals and faith. The disciples were a community, and they wanted to act as a community as well as individuals. And I want to tell you about a community that has done amazing things as well. It's St. Thomas in Sunnyvale, California. Sunnyvale is at the south end of the bay. It's right on the edge. It would probably this day, it's in the middle of Silicon Valley. When I started attending St. Thomas, they were gracious enough to convene a committee to help me discern my sense of call and then to recommend me to the bishop, and things went on from there in terms of my getting ordained. But here's one of the stories I heard about when I first started at St. Thomas. About 3 years before I started attending there, they had had a Bible study on the Lord's Prayer. Harold, whose last name I cannot remember, in that study was taken with the idea of every person receiving food from God. And he came to the rector and he said, I believe I have heard a call for St. Thomas. I believe we need to be feeding people who do not have enough food. And in Silicon Valley, that is a lot of people. The rector listened to what he had to say. They prayed about it together, and she took it to the vestry. The vestry prayed about it and went to the congregation. And 2 years later, our daily bread began serving food Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The only requirement to receive food from our daily bread, lunch was served, a warm meal or a cool meal, depending on the weather. The only requirement was, are you hungry? You didn't have to prove how poor you were. You didn't have to prove you had mental health issues. You didn't have to prove you really needed that food. You just had to say you were hungry. And you were invited and welcomed in and served lunch. About 10 years later, St. Thomas decided it was time for a capital campaign. There were some things that needed fixing in the building. And while they were at it, they raised enough money to make their kitchen into a commercial kitchen so that it could be licensed for the work they were doing, and so that other people could use it to feed the poor and the hungry as well. Every step involved faith and trust and responding to a call. By the time they finished making the commercial kitchen, Silicon Valley had changed pretty dramatically in terms of its demographics. There were a whole lot of folk who had come over from assorted Asian countries, and they had brought their spouses with them. Only their spouses had never learned English. Their spouses didn't have friends. Many of them did not have children, so they sat home alone in their apartment, day after day after day. One of the people who served at St. Thomas as a lay reader and a liturgy leader during the week was Asian, and I don't remember if she was Chinese or Japanese. But she became aware of these women who were by themselves, and she made contacts with the different agencies serving these women, and she went door to door, and she invited them to come to St. Thomas for lunch. And they found other women who spoke their language, and they found other women who understood how lonely they were, and how bored they were, and how desperate they were to come home. And what happened was community. Those women came Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I don't care what the weather was. They were there to be with others who understood them. A whole new ministry. And I'm sure that now that it's 10 years after that, things have changed again. We don't know where it's going. We don't know how things are going to happen. And if we will believe that we have the faith, and if we will believe God's power working through us, amazing things happen. This is where I think that Habakkuk and Psalm 37 fit in to the gospel this morning. The timing may not be what we were expecting. Nothing that happens may look like we expected it to look. We may think it is totally off the rails. But these stories from long, long ago and our own stories from much more recent past remind us that God has been at this a whole lot longer than we have. A whole lot longer than we have. And God is a whole lot more powerful than we are. And God has a whole bigger view than we will ever have while we are on this planet. Get out your bulletin. Look at that last line. Good. Get out your bulletin. righteous have lived by their faith. That is your challenge. That is your homework for this week. What that means will be different for every single one of you, because you are individuals. And what that means is the love of God for each and every one of you will call you to what is next. And I cannot wait to hear what you find out.